Hello friends, tonight we're going to take a look at two of the coolest striker-fired guns around, the Walther PPQ and its older brother, the Walther P99 AS. And before I forget, I was recently informed that it is customary for me to ask you to please subscribe to my channel. So if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. I very much appreciate it, and we've got a lot of new and exciting things coming your way soon. But anyway, back to your regularly scheduled programming. Most of the time over the course of these in-depth comparison videos, it becomes clear that I prefer one gun over the other, but I'll tell you up front that's not the case here. These guns are essentially the same gun, just with different features, so it's worth noting that up front. The PPQ you are probably very familiar with. Folks who like guns inevitably like the PPQ. But the P99, even if you're a gun enthusiast, you might be a little bit less familiar with that one. You've seen it in a lot of movies since it debuted in 1997, no doubt, namely in the hands of James Bond, but you might not have fired one of these, or held, depending on where you live, even held one. These guns are surprisingly uncommon. So where did these come from? Well, the P99 debuted in 1997. With a slightly different appearance than you see here. I think the original model didn't have a 1913 rail. It was like a proprietary thing, so they dropped that for obvious reasons. And much like the HK P2000, which we took a look at recently, the P99 was one of the first truly modern pistols. The P99 is polymer and striker fired, like a Glock, which it obviously was built to compete with, but it's got this very modern and very comfortable sculpted grip that obviously inspired the PPQ and the HK VP9 and the P30, and it also has adjustable back straps. And you could get it, I think, in different frame colors at the time, maybe green, I don't know, gray and FDE. I've only seen the green one in person, but I think there were some other colors. We've also got this front cut that you can use to do your super tactical press checks all over the place. Although this front cut here is not nearly as tactical as the front slide serrations that we find on the PPQ. So you're not going to be able to comfortably press check every 30 seconds like you can with this one, so much so that you lose track of the gun in your big bushy beard, your big tactical-y beard from all the press checks that you're doing. But you still have the option, and it absolutely works. The trigger, though, at the time, striker-fired triggers were considered to be some of the worst around. I love Glocks to death, but a Glock trigger does not feel like a Beretta trigger or a USP trigger or a 1911 trigger or whatever else. So the P99 was really the first of the great striker-fired triggers. Yeah, I mean, I don't think any other striker-fired trigger on the market was remotely comparable. And now with the PPQ and the HK VP9 and the CZ P10C, we sort of take it for granted that you can put a good trigger in a striker-fired gun, but that wasn't so obvious at the time. Earlier in my shooting career, I heard people say that it was impossible to put a good trigger in a striker-fired gun, and obviously that was very, very untrue. This trigger system was called the anti-stress trigger. It's a little bit more complicated in the minds of some people than the system on like a Glock or something like that, and we'll talk about why later. But this extra option, it kind of confused people. So it kind of led to the P99 never quite taking off in America. Fast forward to 2011, the P99 is about 15 years old. And I think Walther wanted to release something that would be more appealing to American shooters, or I don't know, maybe it was something that they thought would appeal more to European police departments. Either way, this is the sort of model though that would inevitably take off in America. But when it was first released, it didn't have the push-button magazine release that we all like so much. It was the paddle magazine release that you see on the P99. So when the PPQ was released, people loved it here, but it wasn't the colossal hit that we would see later. In 2013, though, Walther released the M2 version, and they sold just piles of PPQs. The popularity snowballed. It was a huge hit. Now there are multiple variants, all of which are absolutely great, but the poor P99 was largely forgotten. So let's take a look at the features of each of these guns. Let's take a look at the features of each. So both have excellent 15-round steel magazines, although they are not interchangeable because of the different release buttons. And I'm sure they could make them in such a way that one would work in the other, and I'm kind of surprised that they haven't done that. But also, the P99 has an ambidextrous release. The paddle releases are pretty much always ambidextrous from what I've seen. And not only is the paddle my favorite variety of magazine release control, this is probably my favorite paddle. It works really, really well. And the PPQ's got this fenced off button release that works really, really well too. Yeah, that's great. And the PPQ has this ambidextrous slide release that's really nice and big, whereas the one on the P99 is a bit smaller and just a little bit less comfortable to hit with your thumb, I think, for most people. Both of these guns have adjustable rear sights. I have Trijicon Brighton Tufts on my P99, and I have HDs with the orange front on my PPQ. The PPQ, we talked about the front slide serrations, or I'm sorry, the front slide cut. I guess, as we talk about it, it's probably not there for press checks because the beefier 40 caliber version does lack that cut. It's probably just there for aesthetic reasons, but like the one on the front of the Beretta, it does the job. So the PPQ has this very contoured grip. Oh no, I'm going to drop one gun on the other. So the PPQ has this very lovely contoured grip with these grippy, swirly things on it. It feels really good and has kind of a charming look to it. The P99 grip is also very contoured, especially for 1997, but it is notably less grippy. And then both of the guns have that interchangeable backstrap that we talked about. But here's where they become very different animals when we start talking about the trigger. They're still the same gun, but the trigger on the P99 for some people is just way too much, whereas for other people it's the most interesting thing in the world. So we'll start with the PPQ because it's the easiest. The PPQ is a traditional striker-fired gun. It's kind of funny that Walther went from the crazy P99 design to this more traditional thing, but you'll see why in a moment. So you load the PPQ, you fire it, and each trigger pull is exactly the same. There's no manual safety, and we have the traditional dingus trigger safety. Yeah. What makes the PPQ unique, though, is that the striker is pre-cocked. So this gun has one of the best trigger pulls ever, and it is probably the best striker-fired trigger pull. It's no contest, really. It is exceptional. I know you can't feel it because you're just watching a guy pull the trigger on a video through YouTube, but I'm telling you, it's outstanding. And if you haven't tried a PPQ trigger, you need to take yourself on down to the gun store and give it a whirl. Then the P99, on the other hand, has this anti-stress trigger, which I referenced earlier. So what the hell is that? Well, so you load the gun, and the striker is pre-cocked. You can see this red protrusion here on the back of the slide, and its presence indicates that the striker is cocked. I think that actually is the striker there. So far, everything's pretty normal with the exception of the striker indicator. At this point, each trigger pull would be the same. With the striker cocked, we have no manual safety, just like on the PPQ, and as is the custom. But we also have no trigger safety, as you can see. Instead, on the first shot, we have this kind of effortless take-up and an audible click. That is going to be our trigger safety instead. I think the thinking is probably that as the trigger moves, you would feel or notice that something was amiss. I do still like having the trigger safety. I kind of wish this still had that, but I'm sure there's a good reason that they didn't. So now the trigger is going to sit in this new rearward position for the remainder of the magazine that we're shooting, and the trigger pull is very light, maybe 4.5 pounds or so. Yeah, it's really, really nice. So we have this light, effortless take-up, very smooth. We hit the wall, and the gun fires. And then there's this very short reset. Yeah, so that's not weird though, right? I mean, why do people say this gun is so weird and so crazy to use? What's that crazy button on the top of it? Well, oh, what happened? Here's why this gun is so badass. After you load the gun, or at any point, you can hit that button, which is essentially a decocker, and you decock the striker. And so we can see the red protrusion sort of retreats back into the gun where it lives in there. And as we pull the trigger, we can see the protrusion come out, or if I release the trigger, it goes back in. Yeah, that's the striker. So now that we've decocked the gun, our first trigger pull is long and heavy, maybe 10 pounds, if I had to guesstimate. But the pull is very smooth. It's really funny. If this were a hammer-fired double-action, single-action gun, we would consider this to be one of the best double-action pulls ever. But since it's a striker-fired gun, it just confuses the shit out of people instead, because humans are very smart. So you can set the gun up to have a long, heavy first pull to ensure that you don't pop off around by accident under stress, as scientist guys tell us that humans lose fine motor control under duress. You can do it that way, and then after you fire that initial first round, then the gun just functions as a normal striker-fired gun, only it has the best trigger of its kind ever built on Earth. Or you can just completely ignore the anti-stress feature, not decock it, and use it like any other striker-fired gun. Easy enough. Let's look at what that might look like. So right now we're in anti-stress mode. So our first shot's going to be double action. Then the gun cycles. We're going to use that short reset. Bang. 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 And then, okay, we need to put the gun away. So we're going to either leave it like this, where it's going to have the consistent pull, or put it back in anti-stress mode before we put it away. I really, really, really like the anti-stress mode. Okay, so I've shot both of these guns extensively, about 7,000 rounds through the PPQ and just under 3,000 rounds through the P99. So let's take a look at how they look inside, shall we? So both of them come apart exactly the same, like Glocks. And intriguingly, you can actually put one slide on the other frame, which, just for fun, funsies, we'll do that before the end of the night. So let's see how our P99 is wearing in. So it looks to me like there hasn't been much wear, huh? And these both have a tenifer finish, which I found to be extremely durable. There's a little bit of wear, but yeah, I mean, it's a tilting barrel system, just like a Glock or any other striker-fired system. With these guns, the greatness of them is really in the details. Yeah, and you would think that maybe stuff could get in through that the hole here for the decocker, but it doesn't happen. The piece of metal or piece of plastic fits in there really, really, really well. So you're not going to have a problem with that. You can see it moving inside there. And then there's our striker. We can see where it retreats inside the gun. Actually, you know what? Let's leave the slide off so that we can stick it on the PPQ. All right, so my PPQ, like I said, has had 7,000 rounds through it. Let's see how it's holding up. It looks to be considerably dirtier than the P99. Yeah. Yeah, so we see some more wear there than on the P99, but still not anything approaching excessive. This gun's wearing very well. And yeah, see, we don't have the back bit of the striker there as an indicator. The PPQ is overall just a simpler design inside. Let's put the PPQ slide on the P99 frame. Oh, look at that. It works. Check that out. That actually feels really comfortable. Yeah, look at that. All right, let's do this then. P99 slide on PPQ frame. Huh. I've got to be honest with you. If Walther made basically this setup, but you could use the anti-stress feature somehow with the PPQ frame, I would buy that in a heartbeat. Hell, I would buy 2. That would be such a cool gun. I like that. Isn't that interesting, though? How interchangeable those are. You see, now I was saying that they're essentially just the same gun with different features and different aesthetics to a degree. If you're into aesthetics, which I certainly am. Okay. Yay, that's pretty cool. We learned some stuff. All right, so how do these guns feel? The easy stuff first. I much prefer the magazine release on the P99. I'm of medium height with medium-sized hands. I have to shift my grip on the PPQ to reach the release, and I just don't have to do that as much with the P99. The PPQ M1, or the Classic, I think it might be called now, with the paddle release, that's a thing of great beauty. I would like to have one of those. And there's our button release on the PPQ. See, I have to shift my hand just a little bit to get to it. These Trijicon sights, I have Brighton Tufts on the P99 and HDs on the PPQ. They make these a breeze to shoot quickly. Both of these guns are very light and handy. I've heard it said online that these have a high bore axis and therefore have more recoil than competing designs. Like I've said in past reviews, I actually noticed the opposite. So Walthers do have a higher slide than something like a Glock 19, but they also have a particularly violent recoil impulse. So when you fire the gun, it almost feels like the mass of the slide going back home almost pulls the muzzle back down on target. So yeah, I would say I shoot these much faster than competing designs with a lower bore axis. The Walthers also have a particularly pleasing recoil impulse. These guns are fun to shoot all day, and they feel like they're shooting with you rather than operating as a moving machine that you must fight against. But yeah, I mean, I guess they do sit a little higher in your hand. People just weren't thinking about that sort of thing in the 90s the way that they are now. The grip of the PPQ, though, I will say, it is inherently easier to hang on to without gloves, thanks to that pattern on the grip. So when my hands are dry and warm, both of these grips, they're equally comfortable and generally very nice. In fact, I may somewhat prefer the P99 when my hands are dry. But once I start to sweat, the P99, it's kind of hard to hang on to. Right now, I've got ballast all over my hands from the insides of these guns, and it does feel kind of slick. These knobbly bits just aren't quite enough. So when I initially reviewed this gun, I hadn't shot it yet in the heat of summer. So come July of this year, the gun was fine for the first 300 rounds or so of each range session. But after that, I had to really squeeze much harder to maintain my grip, and I found that it was exhausting my hands. But again, we're talking about 300 rounds. Most people are not going to shoot 300 rounds through one gun in a range session. But you know me, I'm out there trying to abuse the shit out of these things just to see if they break, because I find it amusing to do so and weirdly enjoyable. I don't know why. But the PPQ, on the other hand, it is a pleasure no matter what the weather. Oh, I like the way that sounded. You know what, Walther? Y'all can use that. It should say right on the box. PPQ is a pleasure no matter the weather. Oh. But the triggers, you want to know more about the damn triggers. I get it. The problem is, the more we talk about them, the more I'm seeing that these aren't really different triggers, even as much as it seems like, so much as they're just the same design each for a certain type of person or use. So of the striker-fired guns like the SIG P320, the Glock, the M&P, the XD, of those things, the PPQ has the best trigger. It's not even a contest. Nothing else comes close, and it is the reigning king. The PPQ is super fast at the range and crazy accurate. It feels like a custom-built race gun, but it's a classic G19-sized thing for like $600 or less. You should feel how fast the actual competition built PPQ runs. That thing is madness. I forget what it's called, like the Q5 match or something. It's pretty crazy. And really, the PPQ and the CZ-P10C are probably the best striker-fired guns around. If you don't have a PPQ, you should go out and buy one right now. At the least, buy one tomorrow at the very latest. So the P99, though, on the other hand, it kind of represents an alternate course that striker-fired guns could have taken. It's like reading one of those Harry Turtledove novels, with the alternate history. So in this other history I've constructed, folks didn't want to give up their double action, single action pistols. So striker-fired guns had to cater to that mindset. In this alternate history, we all actually practiced with our guns and didn't fear that first double action trigger pull. So something like the P99 would have been more appealing than maybe a Glock 19. This gun just approaches striker-fired gun safety from a different angle than this does. And really, I haven't had a hard time at all with that first trigger pull, but also you have to keep in mind that I prefer double action, single action pistols. So I don't seem to be that much less accurate with that first shot, but I've extensively practiced it. And man, when I was first adjusting to double action pulls on anything, revolvers, Berettas, whatever, it was very sad for some months. But now, you put in the time and it's fine. But I do see the appeal. This just doesn't require that time investment. Every trigger pull is the same. Okay, so let's look at the triggers back to back. I think that'll be pretty useful. So P99, long anti-stress shot, very short reset. Very short reset. Very short reset. Or let's do that a different way. Okay, so here is with it pre-cocked and the trigger all the way out. It comes in, a little more take up, back to the wall. Yeah, once more with that. Yeah, that's really, really comfortable. All right, let's do the same thing with the P99. Very smooth take up. We're at the wall, very crisp wall. It's a little bit less crisp than the P99, but not by much. Probably not even really a noticeable amount. One more time. Tiny, tiny, tiny bit of creep, but we're splitting hairs here. This is still the best striker-fired trigger that you can get, really. Very short reset. As I sit here and feel them, outside of the anti-stress shot, the P99 and the PPQ, the triggers feel so damn similar. There's probably just a slight variance just because these are two different guns that have been used a different amount, but the reset's the same. Both of them are incredibly crisp. It really just comes down to, do you like the anti-stress feature or not? So how do these differences work in the real world? Practically, the magazine releases, those differences probably don't really matter. You can easily adjust to either the button or the paddle. A lot of us folks own both, and it works totally fine. Both of these guns are insanely fast to shoot, and that lets them work as well as fun things to take to the range as they do as nightstand guns, and they're the right size to carry also. These guns look and feel a little bit larger than they actually are. They're really just Glock 19 sized guns. I will say I prefer the smaller slide release on the P99. The larger ones on the PPQ are in just the right spot for my thumb to block them from operating about half the time, which kind of drives me crazy. But the grip of the P99, as we discussed earlier, it's a little too slick. I rarely complain about the slickness of a grip, and the P99 isn't terrible by any means, but it does fatigue you more quickly than the PPQ will. And the triggers, obviously the PPQ is a breeze to shoot well. It's very rare that someone says that they don't like the feel of the PPQ. Everybody likes it. And I hear folks say that the P99 is way too complicated, it's too hard to use, and it's got that crazy button on top. But as we've seen, there's nothing crazy about it. I think of it as a double action, single action gun, or hell, just don't use the extra features and just use it the same way you do that gun. And by allowing yourself to be baffled by this very cool and frankly sensible system, you're missing out on one of the best triggers around. Final thoughts. I can't tell you which of these is better. They're truly twin ideas, each with a different manual of arms slightly, but not different enough for me to be able to firmly say one way or the other, this is the one you should pick. To decide which is right for you, we probably need to talk a little bit more about why the P99 didn't take off. So really, it just didn't catch on because of how it was marketed. Prior to this video, if you weren't a Walther enthusiast, could you really even tell me what the anti-stress system does or how it works? The marketing for that gun originally was really vague. So at the time, Americans were moving away from double action, single action triggers towards something consistent, Glocks. And I remember a well-known instructor in the early 2000s telling me that double action, single action guns would mess me up, and you need that constant trigger pull. That was the standard doctrine of the time. We wanted one trigger pull the same every time. Glock, as popular as they were then, they were growing in acceptance as the new standard. I would argue that really by 1997, Glock was the new standard. And something like the P99, it just didn't tap into the shooting zeitgeist at the time. And rightfully, they were afraid to advertise the anti-stress system as a double-action, single-action alternative. Remember, folks just weren't liking hammer-fired DASA guns at the time. So instead, they advertised this as kind of a marvelous new trigger system, or at least that's the way I saw it advertised in magazines, or that's what writers were saying about it at the time. So it's this marvelous new trigger system, unlike anything that had come before. And that just sounds really stupidly complicated, doesn't it? Even as I'm saying it now. So that's not accurate. They should have advertised it as the simple system Americans craved then and now, with an optional extra double action pull for people who want that sort of thing that can just be ignored entirely. That's all it is. So just call it a striker fired gun with an optional longer safety pull for carry or something. It's just so easy. It would have massively helped sales, and I think that HK kind of has the same problem when they describe the wildly misunderstood LEM trigger system. So if you're a Glock person who just hates double action, single action guns, you might enjoy either gun, but you probably need the PPQ. You'll be happiest with that one. And if you're going to compete with either one of these, I would probably choose the PPQ. But if you are a fan of metal hammer-fired pistols like the P226, Berettas, or CZs, you're going to love the extra features of the P99. That first pull, maybe it gives me peace of mind and makes me feel more comfortable. It's stupid, I know, but I'm a Beretta guy. Knowing that I have that extra bit of resistance for the first trigger pull on a home defense gun, it makes me feel warm fuzzies in my evil little heart. So I kind of like that. If you're new to guns, the P99 might also be a great option, again, because of that anti-stress trigger pull. Though I guess a good case could be made that you'd benefit from the consistent trigger pull of the PPQ. So it's a coin toss, whatever you feel more comfortable with. Yeah, so no matter what you choose, both of these are outstanding pistols, built to an incredibly high standard. You'll be happy with either. It doesn't really matter which you pick. You could almost just say, I think this one or that one looks cooler than the other one, and grab that. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you all have a wonderful evening, and I'll talk to you soon. Good night. Oh, hi, I didn't see you there. Thank you so much for watching another one of my terrible comparison videos. We laughed a lot, we cried a lot, we learned a lot, hugged a lot, and made some new friends. It meant a lot to me too. And if you learned something, enjoyed yourself, or simply thought I was a weird guy and would like to see more, please hit that subscribe button. It helps me out a lot. Thank you so much, I appreciate it, and I hope you have a wonderful evening. I'll talk to you soon. Good night.